On Christmas Eve, billions of people will celebrate the birth of Jesus. But who was Jesus? The bigger the symbol, and Jesus is quite a big symbol, the less people question it and know about it. For the followers of Jesus, he is the Son of God, the Savior, and the Messiah. But if you want to deepen your understanding of the life of Jesus and his teaching, you have to get to know the environment in which Jesus lived. And this is what I will be discussing in this video. 3 quick notes before I start. I hope that both Jews and Christians, believers and non-believers, will watch this video. I'm a tour guide, not a missionary, and I'm not trying to convert you. I mean, I do want to convert you from someone who doesn't want to visit Israel to someone who does want to visit Israel, but that's it. Second, most of my viewers are Christians and Jews. I am Jewish, and I previously made a video about what Jews in general think about Jesus and Christianity. You should check it out. The New Testament is a great source for learning about one of the most interesting times in the history of our people. Don't be afraid of this book. And one thing I would say to Christians is that some might classify what I'm going to be talking about as the historical Jesus as opposed to the spiritual Jesus. In my humble opinion, I don't think you should separate the two. Every aspect of Jesus' life and teaching, his baptism, his parables, the kingdom of heaven, it all comes from and is driven by the historical setting that Jewish society was at that time. The last remark I want to make before I start is that many content creators save the best for last, but I'm going to do the opposite. I'm starting with what I hope you will find interesting, and at the end of this video, I'm going to address the stupidest issue I have ever talked about in my videos. So, as I said, you need to understand the times in which Jesus lived. Jesus lived in a period called the end of the Second Temple. This is a period that started about 200 years before Jesus was born and lasted until 100 years after Jesus was crucified. Many world-changing events happened during this time, and it is no exaggeration to say that. The basis of all these events was that the Jews were divided into lots of different groups with lots of different opinions about everything: salvation, the role of Jerusalem in the temple, the relationship with the Romans. It is not the case that there was this unified Jewish people and then Jesus came along and was rejected by them. Let me give you some examples. There were the priests in Jerusalem. They were the elite. They had the power and the money, and they were associated with the Romans. They didn't believe in the resurrection, didn't believe in the afterlife, and they rejected the oral Bible. I'm pretty sure that most Israelis don't know this, but 2,000 years ago, the priests in the temple in Jerusalem didn't believe in the Messiah. This group was called the Sadducees. They rejected the teaching of Jesus and were involved in his persecution. There was another group of Jewish priests called the Essenes, and they claimed that the priests in Jerusalem were corrupt, that Jerusalem was corrupt, and as a protest, they went to the desert and lived as a communal sect. They had some interesting rules. They didn't have any possessions. They didn't go to the bathroom on Saturdays, and they didn't think that women could be trusted, so women weren't allowed to be members. And they were waiting for the big war to come, the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. In general, the time of Jesus, the time of the end of the Second Temple, was an apocalyptic era, with many people feeling that the end of days was approaching. I'm telling you about this group because though you will probably have heard the story of Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers and the dove sellers in the temple in anger, it was not only Jesus who said that the temple was corrupt. Many Jews were against the priests in Jerusalem, but in contrast to the Essenes who turned their back on Jerusalem, went to the desert and waited for the big war, Jesus didn't give up on Jerusalem. He insisted on celebrating Passover in the city, even though he knew what was going to happen. Another reason I mentioned the Essenes is that they took the idea of baptism to the extreme. It was very important to them to be pure, and many mikvaot, ritual baths, were found in their village, Qumran. The idea of baptism was an ancient Jewish practice. You enter the water not to get clean, but to be purified. People did it before entering the temple, women went once a month, and some did it every day. Some scholars believe that John the Baptist may have been a member of the Essenes for a period of time, or at least knew about them. The site where John the Baptist baptized Jesus was just a few kilometers away from the village of Essenes. It is in the northern part of the Dead Sea, not far from the Jordan River. Another group of Jews that is mentioned a lot in the New Testament is the Pharisees. They were the biggest group and they represented most of the Jews. In many ways, most of the Jews alive today are descendants of this group. They believed in the oral Bible, in the resurrection, and in the afterlife, and in adhering to many religious rules. Jesus criticized the Pharisees for putting too much emphasis on sticking to the rules and forgetting the true meaning of belief. But again, Jesus did share many of their ideas about the afterlife and the resurrection. Like the Pharisees, Jesus didn't support the Romans and the family of Herod, but he didn't call on the people to rebel. There is a story in which the Pharisees ask Jesus, "Should we pay taxes to the hated Romans?" And Jesus replies, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." There was yet another group, the Sicarii, who were against the Romans and started the rebellion. I know that this is a lot of information to process, but when you visit Israel, even if you take the basic 7-day tour, most of the sites you visit will be connected to this time frame. In Masada, you will hear about the Sicarii. In Qumran, you will learn about the Essenes. In Caesarea, you will hear about Herod and the Romans. In the Galilee, you will learn about the followers of Jesus and their world of ideas. And in Jerusalem, you will hear about everything, all the layers. The main point I want to make, and this is the one thing you need to take away from this video, is that there wasn't one single Judaism in existence before Jesus came along and introduced Christianity as something completely new. There were lots of groups. I have only mentioned a few of them, and Jesus and his followers were one of these Jewish groups. By the way, there were plenty of other Jews around at the time who claimed they were the Messiah. However, one idea that all the Jewish groups shared was that something big was going to happen, and that big thing did happen in the year 70 with the rebellion, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the destruction of the temple. Only two groups survived that disaster and the changes it brought. Two groups that today we call Rabbinical Judaism and Christianity. It was actually a double disaster that happened around the year 70, a physical disaster, since many groups were wiped out, and a religious disaster, since the temple, the center of Jewish life, was destroyed. The destruction of the temple changed everything the Jews thought they knew about the connection to and way of communicating with God. Today, when people think about connecting to the divine, they often think about praying, they think about meditating, they think about sitting quietly and looking at the sea or the desert. Do you know how it was 2,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago? Not only in Jewish temple, but in the Greek temples and in the Roman temples as well. What were the temples? Huge slaughterhouses. Many people bringing animals as offering, and the priests would sacrifice the animal. It was loud, messy, and stinky, but that was the way to connect with the gods. Here is an example of how fundamental this idea of sacrifice is. Let's go right to the beginning. In Genesis chapter 4, the story of Cain and Abel, it doesn't say that they went to a synagogue and prayed, but they both offered sacrifices to God. 4 chapters later, Noah offered an animal sacrifice after the flood, and it even says that God liked the smell. And by the way, where was the Jewish temple built? On Mount Moriah, where, according to tradition, Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac. So you see how important the idea of sacrifice was in the Jewish world and for the Greeks and the Romans. Sacrificing in the temple was the way to communicate with and connect to God from the creation of the world until the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70. When the Jewish temple was destroyed, the Jews had to transform Judaism from a temple and sacrifice-based religion to a prayer-based religion. The names of the prayers today are the names of the sacrifices 2,000 years ago. Jesus' followers didn't need the temple anymore, as they saw Jesus as the Lamb of God, as the one who sacrificed himself for mankind once and for all. In order to understand the life of Jesus, his teaching, and his followers, you have to understand that it's all rooted in Judaism, due to the simple fact that Jesus was Jewish, his disciples were Jewish, and all of his followers were Jewish. Some Christians might not be aware that Jesus never visited a church, since there weren't any churches around that time. Christianity as a religion hadn't been invented when Jesus was born. Jesus was born into a Jewish society, and yes, I'm repeating this since this is the foundation of understanding. So his followers were not Catholics or Protestant or Amish. Those distinctions, of course, did not yet exist because Christianity itself did not exist back then. If what I'm saying here is new to you, or you want to get a better understanding of what I'm talking about, then check out my videos about the separation of Christianity from Judaism, as well as the video about Jesus in the Galilee, and the one I mentioned about what Jews think about Jesus and Christianity. I know that some Jews are not going to like this video, because in it I'm showing Jesus to be part of the Jewish world. I am a Jew, and I personally, and this shouldn't matter to anyone, don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But I also think that every source that shed light on the most important time in our history is legit. Hopefully, if you have seen my videos, you know that I'm an open-minded person, and why not talk about interesting things? Now, that's enough of the spiritual stuff. Let's move on to some high-level stupidity. In recent years, there has been this false narrative that Jesus was a Palestinian. Now, this is so stupid that I wouldn't even have considered mentioning it, but since there is a lot of Qatari money involved in spreading this nonsense, and since we've just seen how high levels of stupidity can be found even in the places we didn't think it could be found, I thought I would better address the issue. Guys, there are some things you need to know about life. Queen Victoria was not one of the Spice Girls. George Washington didn't play in the NBA, and Jesus was not a Palestinian. Jesus was born around the year 0, and the Palestinians as a nation were invented in around 1960. That is 1,960 years after the birth of Jesus. The name Syria, Palestine, was invented by the Romans 100 years after Jesus was crucified. I said that Jerusalem was destroyed in the rebellion. That happened in the year 70. 65 years after that, the Jews rebelled again in the Bar Uthva revolt. The Romans said, okay, we've had enough of the Jews. We are going to expel them from Judea. But not only that, we are going to rebrand this territory. So they changed the name of Jerusalem to Ilia Capitolina and the name of Judea to Palestine. Now, how did they come up with that name? In the Bible, the Philistines are mentioned. They were located mostly on the southern coastline of the land of Israel, and the Jews were mainly located in the mountains around Jerusalem. Many battles were fought between the Jews and the Philistines. Goliath was a Philistine soldier who fought David. Sometimes in the 5th century BC, as the Babylonians conquered the land of Israel and expelled all the different people, we stopped hearing about them. They probably merged with local population in the Middle East. So the Romans in the 2nd century said to themselves, let's use the name of the Philistines, who were a bitter enemy of the kingdom of Israel and disappeared 700 years ago, and call this territory Syria, Palestine. And this name continued to be used in European languages as the name of this territory. It wasn't until the 20th century that local Arabs started using this term to describe themselves. Up until the 20th century, there were no Palestinians, and so also in the 1st century, there were no Palestinians. So no, Jesus was not Palestinian. I'm now in of that, and you can see 2 churches here. They are each around 1,500 years old. I chose to film here not because this site has a connection to that topic, but because this is, after all, a travel channel. And if you are visiting Israel on your Christmas vacation, you should be sure to visit the Negev Desert. My next videos will be about Jerusalem and Armageddon, which is actually in the north. But someday I will make some videos about the desert sites. See you next week. Yalla bye.